Hello everyone, this is Gene from NYC and I'm back with another video. It's actually early Sunday morning where I am, and so I hope that wherever you are, I hope that you're doing well. As always, welcome to the channel. Whether this is your 100th time here or your first time here, welcome. I hope you continue to enjoy the content. This video is going to be about diversity, right? Specifically, my thoughts on how forced diversity in media impacts true diversity, how it hurts true diversity in media, and how we real life people perceive and understand diversity, right? Something you've no doubt seen in recent years, especially if you follow comics and you follow films that are based off of comic books, such as the DCEU or the MCU, is that a lot of characters have been race swapped, or they've been sexuality swapped, or they have replaced other characters. A few examples that you might be familiar with are, of course, the most recent one, the race swapping of Ariel from The Little Mermaid. Others are, I should say, Riri Williams, right? Riri Williams becoming Iron Man in the comics for a time. What else? The current She-Hulk issue by Jason Aaron. While Jason Aaron didn't institute those changes, those were at least dating back to when Mariko Tamaki was writing her, right? It's the characterization, She-Hulk having a characterization that's closer to Bruce Banner than to traditional depictions of Jennifer Walters. Other examples would be Bobby Drake, Iceman. A few years ago, as I said in my Iceman video, his sexuality was flipped. The writer on that was Brian Michael Bendis. I was informed of that by a comment on the video, so thank you to that person. The writer was Brian Michael Bendis, and he flipped Iceman's sexuality in a very controversial manner. Other flips, I guess you could call them, have been Jane Foster taking on the name and powers of Thor. That's gotten people riled up in the MCU, and in the comic books, the character Valkyrie, who's also a part of the Thor mythos, she becoming a lesbian biracial woman when she is neither in traditional, I should say, depictions of her in the comics, and there are plenty of other examples of this. So why do I bring this up? I bring this up in part because of an article that I came across. I'm not really going to address the article, but I'm going to mention it because the article is sort of the impetus for the video. An article featuring Tom Holland, and certain questions are asked of him. He's asked if he would play a gay Peter Parker, to which he said yes, to my knowledge. He's asked about diversity in the MCU, and he says that he would be happy if the MCU had less straight white guys. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think Tom meant any harm. But to me, to say that the MCU needs less white guys, it reminds me of the forced diversity that comics have and other mediums. I'm not saying it only affects comics, but I think comics are the ones that have been biggest hit, that in the movies, because the movies are based on the comics. And the issue I have with his statement is that, in my opinion, and this is one of the many reasons why I think forced diversity, which whether he realizes it or not, he's calling for, hurts true diversity. First of all, right, it, in my opinion, is inherently reductive. To me, when Mr. Holland said that he'd be happy with less straight white guys, to me it's erasing all of the non-white male straight characters that exist in the MCU, such as Valkyrie, right? The numerous female heroes, such as Pepper Potts' Rescue, such as Black Widow. And as much as I hate to say it because I don't like her, even Captain Marvel. These are, and there's also Scarlet Witch, and no doubt many others. Shuri from Black Panther, right? Many others who would certainly fit this bill more than I know because I don't follow the films, right? It is in my opinion to say something like we need less straight white men is to sort of erase or deny what you already have. The MCU already has these incredibly powerful female characters. They have characters such as the race-bent Valkyrie, such as the race-bent Hemdall, such as the race-bent Nick Fury, such as War Machine, such as Blade, such as what's his name? Falcon, right? Although he eventually became Captain America, right? They have Falcon. They have so many other Black Panther. That's what I was thinking of. They have so many, characters who are not white, who are not male, who are not straight. In fact, they'll be gaining a few more once they fully integrate the X-Men into the MCU. Because what I would think anyway, if they're smart, what they'll do is finally reveal what comic fans have known for decades, that Mystique is bisexual, and that her soulmate was a woman named Irene, right? So, my point in all this is that to say that you need less of one thing, to me, is to deny the existence and to erase the existence of the other and claim it's not enough. So that's my first issue with it. To me, it's incredibly reductive when people say that. When they say that they're pro-diversity and they want more diverse characters by saying, oh, we need less white characters. We need less straight white male characters. You're not acknowledging the numerous, and I mean numerous, characters that exist in comics, characters who are well-known, characters who are not so well-known, across decades, across comic companies that exist that don't fit that mold, right? To me, it's like the comic equivalent of Anita Sarkeesian's presumed straight male player. It automatically sets the assumption that straight white man is the default. And to me, really, it's not. I understand why the straight white male is common in comic books. A lot of comic books are written by, at least in America, right? They're different all over the world. But a lot of American superhero comic books that people are familiar with, right? Batman, Superman, right? Wonder Woman, X-Men, Spiderman, Thor, all that, are written by Americans. Not always, right? For example, John Byrne, I think, is British. I think Chris Claremont's British. Right, so it's not always Americans, but for the most part, it is. If we're talking about those types of heroes, and we're talking about, again, comics, again, made by Marvel and DC. Right, so I can understand that. To me, it's no different than, for example, Japanese manga, right? Manga and anime often featuring Japanese protagonists, they're going with what they know. They're appealing to the home crowd. Now, does every manga do this? No, of course not. But many manga take place in Japan. In many manga, right, it's Japanese heroes, right? Even if there's other characters from different countries. I'll use a video game example, Street Fighter, right? Street Fighter has an international cast, but the hero of the story is undoubtedly Ryu, because he's Japanese. Capcom is a Japanese company. So naturally, they're going to make the hero of the story a Japanese man who represents, from a Japanese perspective, the ideal martial artist. And to me, at least what SJW say is the over-representation or over-presence of straight white men. It's like, well, again, this is America. This is written principally, or at least these particular comics, I should say, are principally written by Americans. People write what they know. What do you expect? This would be no different, again, if you went to different countries. Example, Japan. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, in my opinion, when you have someone who claims that they're pro-diversity, but what they're really trying to do is force diversity, which is, in my opinion, a artificial diversity, is that you get these low-quality characters that aren't really characters, but are really just caricatures or parodies. A good example, of course, is Iceman, right? Again, Iceman, Bobby Drake's sexuality was flipped, and Marvel assigned Cena Grace, a out and proud gay man, to write a gay character. What did Cena Grace do? He wrote terrible stories with poor characterization. He took Bobby and he actually made him worse. It's not just because of his sexuality, it's because Bobby Drake honestly became an unlikable character. And because he's so unlikable, at least from my perspective, he makes a terrible representative for gay characters in comics, because he does, as I said in the video I did about him, he doesn't come across as a superhero who happens to be gay or happens to have realized later on in life that he's gay. He comes across as this painful, offensive stereotype. It doesn't help the character, and it doesn't help the marginalized community he is supposed to be a part of and represent. Another example of this is the character of America Chavez. For those who are not familiar, America Chavez is a character that started out in the Ultimates, which was part of Marvel's main alternate universe reality called the Ultimates Universe. Terribly creative, right? But anyway, she started out there, and there she was actually bisexual, and she had a much different personality. She was much more stern. She still had a temper, but she expressed it differently back in those books. Then, when she was given her own solo series, I think about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, that was written by Gabby Rivera, who herself is a lesbian Latino woman, right? She didn't write a story about an alien who was raised in a Latino home who also happens to be lesbian. That was the story I was looking for. That was the story I was hoping for. To see this story about this young alien girl who was raised in a particular culture, who happens to be of a certain sexuality, and how she goes about her life, how she goes about fighting superpowers, your typical hero stuff, right? You fight the bad guy, get into all these adventures, and stuff like that. That was the story I was hoping for. What we got was, again, something that was terribly offensive, because Gabby Rivera doesn't know how to write a comic. And again, what she wrote was propaganda, to the point of literally having female Hawkeye, Lady Hawkeye, Kate Bishop. I was going to say Kate Hudson at first, and I was going to check myself. Kate Bishop. Not just being accepting of the fact that America is lesbian, right? That I can understand. That's no issue. But literally having Kate Bishop, a straight woman, wax poetic about lesbian love, right? Hyping it up as this ideal, right? Like that it is literally the greatest love of all. It was so try hard and so over the top that you either laughed or you cried from the pain. It was honest, at least for me reading, it was honestly one of those, I have to laugh because I'm gonna cry type of deals. And there's been other examples. There's, for example, X-23, who started out as a very strong character, started out as a very good character, but then was maligned by Mariko Tamaki, right, and other writers, but especially Mariko, right, and given again these terrible stories where there's no plot, there's no action, adventure, there's no growth on the part of the characters. That's a huge problem, I think, with the character of Kamala Khan, who is currently Miss Marvel. Right, she's been around in the comics for, I think, over 5 years at this point. I think it's inching closer to 7, because she debuted around Civil War II, and now it's in 2012. So it's been almost 7 years at this point. And her character has gone nowhere. She started out, this Genki girl, right, whose defining characteristics are being female and Muslim. And she's still 5 years later, or 5 to 7 years later, a happy-go-lucky Genki girl whose defining characteristics are being female and Muslim. That's it. Her character has not grown in any significant way. And the thing is that her books are meant to be a bit lighter-hearted, right? They're not meant to be as action-oriented or as intense as most comic series Marvel is known for, and that's fine. I can understand that. I can understand wanting a more kid-friendly hero. That doesn't excuse the character not growing up and developing in any significant way. It doesn't. And that's the worst part. There's just no quality control. It's just poor writing, poor characters who truly have no point, have no meaning, have no purpose in their story outside of just being representative, right? In my opinion, the character of Kamala Khan exists first and foremost to have a prominent Muslim hero, because Sana Amanat is Muslim. Keep in mind, they already had a Muslim character in Dust, who's part of the X-Men, but who cares about comic history except for actual comic fans? But instead, they create Kamala Khan and give her a white woman's name. Miss Marvel, the title, the mantle, belonged to Carol Danvers before she became Captain Marvel. So they took a female character, gave her a man's superhero name, Captain Marvel. Then they took her superhero name, right? And keep in mind, Carol's a white woman, and they gave it to a brown Muslim girl. And you wonder why you have people criticizing these type of things as hand-me-downs, as saying that, brown people don't have good enough stories, and so here's a white person's name, here's a white person's story, here's a white person's identity. And you wonder why they get criticisms like this? This is why. This is what happens when you have forced diversity. These characters are not allowed to be characters. They are caricatures. They are checkboxes. They are pawns, really, in the hands of their writers who don't really care, in my estimation, about the stories being told. They just care about being able to show the world, whoever that is, usually just the woke mainstream media, say, see, we have a woman in a man's place, we have a woman in a prominent male role, or look, we have a brown person. Yes, you have a character who couldn't hack it on their own, and instead of actually either retooling that character, because that's common in comics, right? A version of a character doesn't work, you give it to a different writer, you take a different approach and you try again, right? That's happened. There's plenty of examples of that. One good example, although it's a villain, is Sabretooth. Sabretooth didn't start out as the Sabretooth we all know. He was actually just a human serial killer. I think in the Iron Fist books, it was Iron Fist or Shang-Chi. I want to say Iron Fist. It wasn't until, I think, John Byrne got his hands on him and introduced him into the X-Men books that Sabretooth started to become Sabretooth. Right? So characters don't always start out, the way that we remember them as, or the version that we come to, identify as them. For example, Superman couldn't always fly, right? There was a point where Supes couldn't fly. That was something that was added later, and it's an element that stuck and became iconic to him. Or Batman and his no-kill rule. That didn't always exist, but again, a writer at some point added that. It became iconic to the character, and it stuck. So characters changing and developing in this way is perfectly fine and normal and natural. But what people who claim to be pro-diversity do is that instead of going through the natural creative process of trial and error and creating characters and ditching characters and revamping characters, they decide basically to take the shortcut. And the shortcut is to take an established character who, more often than not, is white. Not always white, but oftentimes white, because whites have become acceptable targets. It's acceptable to replace them in media these days, as we're seeing. So more often than not, it's a white character, right? And regardless of whether or not this change makes sense, they go through with it, so that they don't have to go through the work of actually developing characters, regardless of their race or their gender or their sexuality, who can stand on their own 2 feet. They basically skip the line. And this really hurts the character in the end, because the character never gets to grow, never gets to change, never really gets to become iconic on their own. They never get to have their own name. They're always going to be seen as the poor man's version of whatever. Right? X-23 is going to be seen as the poor man's version of Wolverine. Ironheart, as she's known now, Riri Williams is the poor man's version of Iron Man. And so on, and so on, and so forth, right? What the pro-diversity crowd tries to do is that they try to make some of these characters legacy characters, which in and of itself is a long-standing legacy in comics as a practice. But these characters don't become legacy characters. They don't become, the next in line in this long prestigious line of heroes and characters that have come before. They become the poor knockoff, right? That you get for cheap, but is of lesser quality. And again, in the end, all this really does is hurt these particular characters, because so many of them do have stories to tell. That's one of the most frustrating things for me when I read and review bad comics, is that I can see the potential, but it gets wasted. It gets wasted because of this false pro-diverse push that insists that you show diversity, that you show that you have a non-straight white person as your lead, instead of actually developing a character and letting them become as famous as that straight white character that you're trying so hard to dethrone. And fans respond, usually very negatively, right? They stop buying books. What happens? Even in the movies too, right? People who go see the films, they may not make YouTube videos, right? But they start to see this trend. They start to see the quality of character declining, which overall is going to hurt the quality of the film, and they're going to stop putting in money. I'll give you a good example, right? You're going to hear people say about the Captain Marvel film that, it's great, it made $1 billion, all this stuff. Yeah, it was a financial success, not denying that. But I could not find one media outlet, right? Whether it was mainstream media, whether it was media that's pro the diversity push or against the diversity push, I could not find one outlet that gave Captain Marvel anything more than a C. It was a mediocre movie. No amount of money in the world changes the quality of the film. It was a C-level movie, and C-level for the MCU might as well be F. It was not a good film. And again, Captain Marvel is the character that they want to be the face of the MCU. That's another crazy thing, right? They're complaining about straight white men, but apparently an unlikable straight white woman is perfectly fine. But anyway, this is the character who's supposed to be the face of the MCU. People don't like her. And unless Kevin Feige or whoever does something about it to change the character around, as these movies come out, and as these characters and their comics are written and rebooted 100 times over, people are just going to tune out, right? You'll have some people like myself who make videos and who rant and who point out the problems, but in the end, your average consumer is just going to say, nah, I'll just keep the $3.99 in my pocket. I won't buy the comic, or I'll just keep the $20 or whatever the movie ticket costs. I'll just keep that in my pocket. I don't need to see this. I don't need to read this. Right? This is what happens when you have a false pro-diversity push. Diversity isn't really the goal. The goal is to look good. And when you have that, you create all these problems. And in closing, one of the biggest problems is that when you have this pro-diversity push, and again, this diversity push doesn't really create any new diverse characters, nor does it benefit the characters who have been forcibly changed to now meet this new definition or standard of what is acceptable. Guess what happens? The word diversity becomes a dog whistle. The word diversity becomes dirty. Not because diversity in and of itself is bad. It's not. Ideally, there should be diversity of look, of ethnicity, of sexuality, of origin, of age, of experiences, and all that. There should definitely be diversity. But when you have diversity pushes like this, that are truly not about creating characters from different lands and from different experiences in different places, when it's not really about truly creating diverse characters, diverse original characters, diversity becomes a dirty word. Diversity just becomes code for get rid of the straight white guy. Whatever you do, get rid of the straight white man. That's threatening, right? That's adversarial. That pushes readers and viewers away, because these readers and these viewers are attached to these characters. People stopped reading not just Iron Man, but all of Marvel, because Tony Stark, a character they had been following for years, was in a coma, and his identity was stolen by a little black girl that he didn't even know personally, right? And whenever you bring this up, you'll run into people say, well, that's racist. Not knowing or not caring that it's not an issue of race, because War Machine, right, Jim Rhodes, has been Iron Man. He has worn the Iron Man armor. He has been known as Iron Man. Not just a derivative as War Machine, but actually Iron Man. The difference in that is that James Rhodes has been long established as one of Tony's best friends. He has a personal connection to Tony. He has a personal connection to God knows how many fans that exist of the character over the years. So when he takes over as Iron Man, nobody complains because it's understood, it's expected. It doesn't come across as theft. It comes across as a friend helping a friend out. Such as when I think it was during the Demon in a Bottle storyline that Jim temporarily took over as Iron Man, not as War Machine, but actually wore the Iron Man armor. That's one of the first times I think I'm aware of it. But there are no doubt others. But again, right? Going back to my example, right? People didn't mind James Rhodes because James is a friend of Tony's. People like James. Nobody at the time knew Riri. She wasn't well known. She wasn't well established. She didn't really have a story yet because she's new. It takes years. It takes decades for a character to have a robust background, especially in comics. And you just had this unknown character come in and take Tony's place and take Tony's name, steal his armor, and all it did was just make people like her. Who knows how many fans have been forever lost because Marvel did this, or rather, in this case, Brian Michael Bendis did this. There are readers who will never give the character a chance, even though now she's Ironheart and she's under a different writer, e-viewing. There are people who will never give the character a chance because of how she was introduced. First impressions are important, and these poor man's version diversity characters don't make good first impressions. And they turn fans, they turn readers, they turn viewers, they turn people with money to spend, with disposable income, away. They turn it away from the product. And this is one of the big reasons why comic shops are slowly but surely closing in America. The numbers of shops that have been closing increases every year. Number of comics sold decreases every year. And this is a big reason why. This is beyond just the regular ups and downs, right, dips and falls of an industry. This is a death knell. This is the death knell of the American comic industry as we know it, and a big part of the reason why it's in its death throes is because of this false diversity push, which actually pushed out diversity because it rejected writers like Christopher Priest, who didn't want to be pigeonholed as being the black writer. It pushes out young creative talent who, regardless of sexuality or gender or anything like that, who have stories to tell, right? But Marvel doesn't want them. DC doesn't want them because they make diversity this bad thing, and it turns readers away. It makes readers not interested in these new characters because it sets a precedent of, oh, great, here's another person, here's another black girl character to replace my favorite hero. Here's another, skinny girl, skinny chick replacing my Wolverine. Right? Oh, here we go. We're going to take my favorite character and arbitrarily make them gay because that's what's cool. This is the type of cynicism that characters are going to run into. They're not going to be recognized on their own merits. They're just going to be objects of scorn, of hatred, of divisiveness. And this is what happens when you have this false push toward diversity. You don't actually get diversity. You get everything but. And in the end, you get more of the same because, just like Disney, right, these companies are going to go with what works. You want to know why you keep getting Spider-Man films? Right? Oh, almost, I wouldn't say almost always, because there is the Spider-Man film featuring Miles Morales. But they still keep overlooking Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. I'm just saying. But anyhow, but you know why most of the well-known depictions of Spider-Man are of Peter Parker? Because that's what works. Because that's what people are most comfortable and familiar with. And people who are again for this forced diversity push, they're going to push Disney and Marvel and DC and others right back into the arms of the very characters they claim they don't like and they don't want to see anymore. So all this is going to do, in my opinion, is introduce more straight white characters to the MCU, because these other characters who are not white and who are not straight and who are not male, right, are going to be seen as potential controversial characters. And these companies don't want controversy that can't generate money. They don't mind controversy. They're willing to stir up controversy, but it needs to be controversy that will actually generate money. Not just a buzz, not just an argument online, but actual monies. If it can't generate monies, it's not going to be used. It's going to fall to the wayside. Just like the American comic industry is doing, because it isn't generating money anymore. But anyway, those are my very rambly thoughts on the matter, and to be honest, I could go on even longer, but this is nearing 40 minutes. And I think I've covered all the main parts, all the major parts. But if there's anything else you think I missed, anything you want to add, please say so in the comments. So I hope you have a good Sunday, and I will see you around. Bye.